We'll be starting with a session from Brian about structured data capture. Take it away.
That's coming through okay? That's excellent. So welcome. This is the SDC data extract. That's working. We're back again. Excellent. So let's hope that was the technical issue. All right, I can work with that. That's also cool. So yeah, we're welcome to SDC and data extract. Now, I was checking through the agenda. There's not a full intro to SDC out there on the guide this time. If you are new to questionnaires and FHIRs, you want to put your hands up. So there's a handful. There are some other good presentations from previous dev days on SDC, so I highly encourage go and take a look at those. But I will give a really short recap on some of the real highlights you have to know before I dig into the extract. So who am I? I'm Brian Poslethwaite. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft Research. And although that's a photo of me in Redmond, I'm from Melbourne in Australia, so long way from home. So what we're going to try and do today is a quick recap on FHIR questionnaires and structured data capture, then briefly talk about pre-population, so the three different varieties of those, specifically in the context of why they're important for extract, and then dig into the meat of the extract with the observation approach, the definition approach, and hopefully the really exciting new template-based approach. And then just a bit of salt at the end for some structure map, for those that know what that is. So typical workflows with questionnaires is we need to locate the appropriate questionnaire to use. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's given to you and it's just there. Then we need to load or render that questionnaire along with any referenced content. We can do pre-populations of that questionnaire, which could come from other data that's in the context or from clinical records or from other locations that could be associated, or it could even be completely custom implementation to do that. That all fits in. Then the user enters the data, completes the form, checks that everything's all good, does local validation while that's being entered, so quite dynamic. Then the questionnaire response, which is your completed form, can get validated by the server, and then issues errors and warnings and information messages that need to be reported and pass those through. And then finally, once we've saved it, you can then do other things with that content, which is the meat of this presentation, is extracting that data into FHIR resources and using that. And so once again, pre-population, extraction, that's what we're here for. So the very basics is the questionnaire resource itself, so what resources are involved. It's a definitional resource, kind of similar to structure definition in some ways, in that it contains all the fields in the resource, but it's not really a resource, and has references out to value sets, terminologies, and all the business logic associated with that questionnaire. The questionnaire response resource, which is where you actually capture the data, and that references the questionnaire that it was related to, and also the patient or whatever other subject information. And then that mirrors, so the really important things here, I wonder if I've got a thing, no. is the structure of the questionnaire response, so the nesting of the item, so questionnaire.item and questionnaire response.item needs to match. So if your questionnaire has a tree of questions, then the questionnaire response will have a tree of answers. So it's not just a straight list of item answers in the questionnaire response, it has to match the questionnaire. And the other thing I always like to point out is you don't normally profile questionnaire. So with FHIR, typically if you want to do something, you create a profile on a resource and that's how you define it. Well, questionnaires are kind of different because they are the definition of what to do. So the only reasons you might want to define a profile on questionnaire is if you were constraining down to say, my particular system only supports these particular item types. So it's not something about a particular form definition, it's about a capability of another system. So that's why you would. So what is SDC? So I sort of mentioned it a little bit. It's the Structured Data Capture IG. It extends and provides all the really cool meat to the FHIR questionnaire resource. So the questionnaire resource and questionnaire response resource are the skeleton that sits underneath, but all that dynamic, rich behaviour you'll find in the SDC IG. So the 2 pages particularly is populate and extraction, that's what we're about to go through. And we're currently reconciling the STU4 version of the spec. And there's been some really good new capabilities, particularly the template, which is nice. So with the form filler, so that's the person or system that goes and enters the content. They'll go and search and pull their content out of the form manager, reading terminologies. And then once they've done that work, they'll go through the form response manager. And then when you want to submit that, it'll come from the form receiver and archiver. So if you want to go in more detail on that, straight off to the SDC guide. Cool, and importing and exporting. So before I get into the other parts is, why am I extracting this data? So when I'm defining an extract rules, I really need to know, where is it going? Am I just going to be storing it locally? Am I going to be sending or submitting it to an externalization? Or am I just storing it externally? So these are all different conditions that you might have while you're considering the design for your extract. So is this new data? Do I need to worry about updating that content in the future or as it's going? Because if we're wanting to update something that came in, we're going to need to have all that information like IDs so it can actually update on the way out. So that's kind of a bit of a sneak. And yeah, did it come from pre-population, users, was it dynamically calculated or loaded? Those are all important things that you might want to know or consider while you're doing that extraction. So we've got our FHIR questionnaire with its pre-pop rules, extraction rules which are embedded inside it. They'll run out to a pre-pop service which might be internal to the renderer, it might be internal to the system, or it could be external. So all of those are possibilities. They'll leverage the launch context, so which is typically the patient. That's quite normal. Might have FHIR services, which is where it's going to go and drill to get additional info. That could even be FHIR documents like an IPS summary. That would be a really good case for that. Then that's going to produce the questionnaire response. And then once that's all completed, we can then pass that off to an extraction service, which could also be internal as well, which will produce the resource services, and then you'll go and do something with that specific content. Did that all sort of make sense? Bit of a flow? Yeah, excellent. So straight on with the populate. So populate requires a context and a source, so where is this information coming from? The mapping itself, so how to do that, so the definitional side of the mapping, an engine which understands that to process it, and knowledge of where it's coming from. So if I was coming from a document, it was an IPS, then I know the structure of what the IPS is and what that looks like, so I can process that nicely. The operation itself is the $populate operation, and there's currently 3 options for doing that. The observation-based method, FHIR path-based method, and structure map-based. There is some talk of a definitional approach and using CQL, but those are not currently in the SDC IG, but there is discussion that they may end up in that spec as well. And its output is going to be the questionnaire response and operation outcome. Cool. So once again, the input to the operation is a post, whether it's going to the type or the instance. So we can send it the questionnaire. So if it's a service which doesn't have content on it, you can send the actual questionnaire in that post. Or it could be an ID, or it could be a reference. So you've got some choices on how to initiate that populate. The subject, or the ID of the patient that's going to be populated, and then any launch context items. And then you get back your questionnaire response. And there's a note there, not typically wrapped in a parameters resource, but it could be. So that's kind of interesting. Why would I wrap that in an output in a parameters? Because I want to embed an additional operation outcome with that, so I can report back some information messages or warnings to say, yeah, I populated as best I could, but there's some other issues potentially here. The STU3 spec had some issues. I've got a list there. It's down the bottom, so those at the back can't see the list. But those are now resolved in the STU4 ballot, so we're pretty happy with where that's landed. So I will do a little bit of a demo for some of this. So it's the observation-based is the lowest flexibility, but it's also the lowest effort. So if all you're dealing with is observations, the observation technique is really cool. And all you do is indicate that, yes, the source, this is coming from item.code, and says which coding, whether it's Loink or SNOMED or some other internal code, and then indicate, go and look for the observation link period, which is go and look in the last 6 months and find any observations that have this code. So that's pretty simple. And you can do groups if your components are, your observations are component models, and if the system understands things like specific Loink values are patient.birthdate, you could do stuff like that, but the number of systems that are going to know that is probably pretty low. So know your target when you're doing your design work. So, I don't know, is that actually readable at the back? Mostly? Yeah, very. Well, that's not that important. So all we've got at the top is questionnaire observation link period, value 3 months. So that was all I needed to introduce to say, go look back that far. And then on the item code, it says, go find the body weight. Go find the body weight measured. So you can see I've got 3 different codes there. And so it'll create a query, which would look kind of like that, to say, go and find that information. So that's the effective query that the rendering engine or pre-population engine would do to go and grab that content. Not too bad. So, on to the FHIR path-based method. So that uses potentially the launch context, and it can also define additional variables or additional content that it requires to come through. And then with each of those, you get the item population context, which you can then grab groups. So if you had something like a patient, I have a demo, I'll walk into that. So the item population context gives you group level contexts for repetition. So you can walk down through a tree and pin areas and walk in. And then the initial expression is how you actually use a value out of that and populate it. Use variables with xFHIR query or FHIRPath natively to go and create computed values from other content. And let's see how we go with the demo side. Given we've had our technical issues, this is hopefully just going to go, wow, excellent. So is that readable? Yeah, mostly good. Good. Yeah, just barely, but all right. All right, so we'll go pre-populate that content. will show a renderer. So here's a renderer, it's a simple form. So that's the form definition on the left. That's the rendering on the right, so you can see, yep, that's not too bad. There's multiple renderers, so you can see it with different rendering engines. And then I'll go and pre-populate that. So that runs away, grabs that content, and then populates it into the field. And so you can see there I've got my John Simpson, 20, and there's a whole bunch of medications. That's the beauty of using live demo from a test environment. You're going to get some great, exciting data. And apparently this person is having a lot of ABC data. So that's a thing. So backing on our content, so we've got our launch context, which is coming from our patient. We've got a variable which has been added in. That's an FHIR query. So if you're at Lloyd's FHIR query session, or is that still coming up? That was yesterday? You should have seen it, it was amazing. Okay, so yeah, the cool part here is it's basically just a FHIR search. And so we've got the resource type. So you note that there's no base under there to say what server to talk to. Well, that would be the server that's associated with your system that's running, or it's passed to the renderer or pre-population engine to know what to do. It says look for the patient that has the, inside those handlebars, or sorry, curly braces, is the patient ID, so it'll evaluate that particular variable, which has the variable from the patient, and put that value in, and then execute that query. So that's kind of neat. And then I've got another one for medication. So you can see the conditions. All we actually did was 20. And then we've got a whole bunch of those medication statements, and that's probably don't want that, right? So instead of that, so as we go down, let's have a look at what happens with some of this data. Let's look at the family name for instance. And the cool thing is I can actually flick between the two renderers, and it's got the same data in both, so that was a kind of a nifty trick. So now I'm over here on our family name, and I can see here we've got our initial expression, which is that FHIR path definition, and we can say it's going patient.name.first.family.first. So that means that you can have multiple names, and so you can then choose what that logic is. So that's kind of cool. So let's look at what happened for number of active conditions. So that looked at the condition query, so that FHIR query variable. So it's selecting either the total value, so if the bundle had a total value, but not all systems used that in there. So we've also got this or the entry.count, so to work out which that is. That's where my 20 comes from. And I kind of suspect that that's probably the max count that's coming back from that server, from that query. So that's intentional on my part to point out to you. Be aware that paging with search and FHIR query is a thing, and you should consider that when you're doing your design work. Now, while we're here, I noticed that that was wrong, so I'm going to go down to that area. And so here's our item population context, so which has been put onto, I'm going to close that up. So our repeating medications group, I've said I'm going to put an item population context, which is going to say for every medication group, so every entry in that bundle that came back from that search query, I'm going to create a new medication row. So that's kind of cool. But what we don't want where, so you notice that it's refreshing on the right because I'm changing the definition, and we're going to say, I don't want to have status is not equal to entered in error. That feels like a good thing to do. Let's just click that and make sure it actually does that. Live demos. Yay, I did. So that was pretty quick in terms of I've got the logic wrong, I've seen an issue, and come in and patch that. So that's kind of cool. So that's the context, but actually putting that content in, so you know what I've got, med is the name of that variable for that item context. So when I'm pulling out my ID, you note that there's no actual ID column here because I've hidden it, because we want that ID when I'm doing my update to go and put that ID into the other field. So yes, hidden values are a thing, and that's what the trick you use to grab stuff, stash it away, so you can then use in the extract. And yeah, name, that's all very good. So any questions on that? That all seems pretty straightforward. There's one right at the back.
Yeah, do we have a mic or?
I'll try and repeat back the question.
Yeah, is there some kind of thoughts about providing like an advisory framework for what you just did, like filtering out the entered and error observations? Because I feel like that's a common thing that people might want to do.
There isn't something documented specifically around that at the moment. It's something that would make a lot of sense. Sorry, the question was, is there an advisory framework for what sort of queries you should do, what should you take care of? So like those 2 tips I gave in terms of look out for paging, look out for entered in error statuses, look out for historic values that have overwritten. There isn't somewhere that's like that at the moment. But it's a good suggestion. Maybe Lloyd will write something down and complain to me later for bringing it up. Cool. All right.
Yeah, just on that, the idea of like components, questionnaire components for common things like medications or problem lists or any of those issues, is that something that's in scope anywhere?
There is a whole section in the SD spec for modular forms. So that is something you could have a look at. I'm not covering it today, but it's certainly something that you can check out and go through. Cool. All right, well, I'm going to jump forward. So thank you for those good questions. So cool, I really like that approach. Helped come up with it. And yeah, so that was the FHIR lab with the forms testing area that I was messing with. It's at FHIRpathlab.com. That's free and open. It's a full open source testing platform. And just because you can go into the context tab, and that's the context it used for that pre-population. And yes, because this was messed around with, Homer Simpson is not actually who patient example should be. Patient example should be Peter Chalmers. So I can change what is that context. I can rerun that extract and go and have a look. And there we go. So it actually gives you the right information. And with that pre-pop tab, it actually shows you from a debug perspective what was the stuff that was sent to the server for the pre-pop to run. And then the response shows you the actual current definition that's there at the moment. And yeah, if you wanted to put other things like the encounter into your sample, that's how you go and control those. So pretty nifty. So IPS, so this is a pretty hideous demo, and I apologise, it's going to probably look really, really, really small, but it's more or less the same as what we just did. So where I've downloaded a form, this is a IPS link, so we can go and download that, downloads that IPS bundle, and then applies that into the pre-populate. So pretty cool, yeah. So the structure map based is the ultimate flexibility. It's the most complex by probably an order of magnitude further. If you want to do it and you know it, clap your hands. No, it's there, it's good. And so basically you just have a query that says, run this bundle query, get your content, run it through a structure map that's referenced, and then you're all done. So just to see what does a structure map look like, they look like this. So they're pretty dense, but it's a lot of power in that complexity. So I'm not going to walk into any more detail than that. So on to the extraction. So just like population, the extraction requires a target. Where are you sending it? Are you going to do creating update? You need a mapping, an engine, and knowledge of where you're putting it. The 4 options are observation, definition, template, which is new, and structure map, which I'm not going to go into again. It's $extract, and it returns out your bundle of content and or an operation outcome. So once again, it's an input parameters to the actual resource type, where you can post the whole questionnaire response, You can optionally throw in the questionnaire. So if your extractor doesn't have access to the questionnaire, you can pass that through. And I've done that for some debugging and making it easier to have an external service, which is kind of cool. Otherwise, you can do it to the questionnaire response ID $extract, whether it's a post or a get, so that it can come back with that, reducing that amount. So if you've already sent it to the server, you don't need to send it again. You can just say, extract and give me your stuff. So I've got 2 examples. A simple one, which is a single question with a single value and coming out to produce a nice bundle with that observation. So I did that. So it's a nice sample. I did all 4 approaches to produce that content. And then I did a complex one, which is complex patient demographics and 3 simple observations. So it really shows the power of whether it's short or large, and we'll go into the complex one during the hands-on lab next, or if there's other people that want specific templates created, we can do those live and try that out. But we're going to go through the simple one here. So observation extract is, once again, just straight out using the item.code to indicate I want to do that. I can tag it and say, here's an extension for the observation extract category, a subject, and an actual observation extract, which you can put at the root and say, any question that has an item.code, I want you to extract that into an observation. So in terms of low-hanging fruit, how can I get that to happen? That's the lowest. Put the one extension at the top, item.code for stuff, and you'll get a heap of observations out. You can mix and match, so you can use observations and templates and definitions all in the one thing. But if you do that, be aware that does the service that you're planning to target do all of those things? So just be aware. And yeah, groups can create components in observations. So whether it's a component within the observation or 2 separates with the part of, though that's a bit fluffy and there's some issues in Jira to report that. So let's have a look at the demo on that. So pick a renderer today. So yes, we have that, and extract. And so here we can see that bundle. So create our bundle. It's got our URL, final. There's the coding that came from it. And in fact, I'll lock that on the left. Have a look at our response on the right. So there's our subject that came from our subject, our performer, which came from the performer, our authored came from the effective date. So you can see for very little effort in that definition by saying, yes, extract, and have a code, all that stuff happened. So that's pretty cool. I like it. Says he. So definition extract is sort of another step up in complexity. If you're targeting things that have profiles that have lots of definition in that, and you're not pulling a lot of content which is in the form, this can make an awful lot of sense. So it can handle slicing. So if you've got slices, you can reference those slices and pull that in. So let's have a quick look at what that looks like. So from our definition, so we come through and it says, so we're going to use the definition extract approach. We're going to say the definition that so the resource you're going to create is an observation. So that tells the extraction engine, that's the profile that we want you to use. Then we walk down, ignore the use context. And it says, I'm going to do extract a value. I'm going to put into that observation status, final value. So that's one of the things that was added in this last round of the SDC ballot, was a capacity to include additional content, so I don't need to create another profile for the active one, for the in-progress one, or the final one. I can just fix that value in. And here's another one, so put in another value for the category. And then to populate the subject, I just go use the % resource, which is the questionnaire response, .subject, and that gets me the answer in. And here's my effective date. Is coming out of the resource that was going in. So notice I've got authored, or last updated, or now. So you've got that sort of flexibility from FHIRPath. Hoping everyone saw the FHIRPath session yesterday. There's another lab on Friday if you want to look at that too. And that's really the whole trick with this. And then the actual item itself, that's the only thing we need to add on to the item to say that particular question. So this item, which is that question, is going to go into the observation.value. So all the rest of that was the boilerplate to fill in those other fields. So that felt pretty heavy in terms of what I had to do. I could have instead had a profile on observation that had the majority of that content in it, like the categories and codings, and then I wouldn't have to have that in the questionnaire definition. So profiles, lots of fixed content, much better. Cool. And you can also control the transaction bundle entry, but I'll talk about that when I do the template shortly. So, and the main meal, the template extract. So this is brand new. So it was an idea that was brought up a while back and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we can just take a sample instance of what I want to extract and use that as the template for extracting. So if I wanted to create a patient as a part of a form, then I just embed a patient in the contained questionnaire and then mark up that question and that patient with all the values. So where do I pull those values out of the form, out of the answer? And so I said, that's never going to work. That can't be right. And after much umming and ahhing, I said, okay, I'll give it a crack. And then did it, and it turned out that it was pretty cool. So there are two versions of it, the basic extract and then the full bundle extract. The full bundle extract means that you put into your template the entire bundle, whereas the template extract, you do resource by resource. So if you've got 4 different resource types, you just have 4 different templates. And away you go. Extract context. So if you need to go and switch between stepping down through a tree structure, so if I've got one group that is for the patient demographics and another group for the related persons, so the extract context can allow you to step into the appropriate part of the questionnaire, and extract value puts the actual value in. So I'll actually step through these. So these are probably easier to see than inside the other, but we will jump in and actually look at it anyway. So the template extract, you can put it at the root to say, if you put it at the root, it will always create one. So if you know you're always going to create something, just put it at the top and it will create it. So in this case, it's just saying template extract, this reference to the contained observation template, and then you put that in. We then have resource ID and saying I'm going to put that, and if you note there that that's obs ID in backticks in the string, so that's a FHIRPath expression to say always put that in. Normally you wouldn't fix that, you'd put some other value in there, whether it's computed, but that's how you get that. So now controlling that bundle entry, so using extract, it's going to create the bundle, it's going to put an entry in there. That entry, if you want to create, so put or post, that's the request method. If your resource that is being extracted has an ID in it, then that will be a put. If it doesn't have an ID in it, it's a post. So I don't need to try and do mangling to generate the method. I just worry about putting the ID in. And then the rest of that will fill in. Request.url is the same deal. If it had an ID, it will put that in, otherwise it's going to be the type. If none match, so you can do that conditional updates. So you've got control those. And full URL, just the same as we did putting that resource ID, you can put in a full URL so you can do references between resources. So that's really neat. And we'll have a look at that specifically in the hands-on lab up next. And the extract context is a FHIR path expression which allows you to set into a specific group. So if you extract at the top and you wanted to walk into the list of contacts, you could then set the contacts to say start here. And then the value is just extract the value. And the two exciting variations is resource.id and element ID you can't populate, but the resource ID you can, which is back up in our control. So with that demo there. But you can't do that with the template extract bundle because you're just generating the whole thing and have to try and mess with that yourself. Also, here's just an example of extract value. So the subject, because subject is a data type or a backbone element, it can put that content in there. So if the value of that expression comes up with nothing, so you get no result there, then this, in this example, so if there was no subject, this subject property, even though it's in the template, it would be removed. And so it's not there. And here is the effective date time. So effective date time is a primitive, so therefore you have to use the, in this case, this is JSON, so it's using that JSON. 10 minutes, awesome, I'll get my boots on. So the template bundle extract's pretty similar. Actually, I'll have a quick look, just so you can see one all together. So here we go. So we've got our renderer. Yes, do that, which is cool. So we've got our contained resource. Let's just ramp that up. So template extract, put that observation template in, and then there's actually nothing else in the actual definition apart from linking to say initiate. And then inside that contained template, we see our obs template. So that has to be there so it can link through. Then we've got all of that stuff that we had with the definition approach. We had all those fixed values to try and inject them in. So that was pretty intrusive. Whereas here it's just, that's just part of the template. And then my subject, bring that in. Resource authored, bring that in. Issued, bring that in. Performer, and there's my value boolean. And so resource, which is the questionnaire response, item, link ID, complication, answer value. So that turns out to be pretty clean, doesn't it? When we look at the more complicated one, we have a bit more fun. But well, we didn't crush the button, did we? Just to show that yes, it does actually do what it says. And there we go. So the content comes out. There's our full URL. Cool. All right. And the bundle, template extract bundle is just the same, except it's the whole bundle in the package. So structure map based looks the same. I'm going to click on it just to show that it does work the same. So all it has is target structure map, there's the reference to the map, and then it's just a basic simple thing. So run, yes, extract. And so we get the same results, and the actual map itself. And this is that same map. So here we go, we've got our map. It's going to take a questionnaire response in. It's going to use a bundle and an observation. So extract bundle, output to a bundle, create the entry, create the full URL, create the populate, create the method, create the observation, then populate it, and populating the observation sets those values, and then puts the observation value. So it's actually not that scary once you start getting into it, but it's a really steep curve. So I kind of like it, but then again, I've got tools. So tooling, what's out there? So all the lab that you saw, that's all open source. The two renderers that I showed inside the lab. So that's CSIRO's pre-pop engine, plus their renderer. The US National Library of Medicine has their LHC forms, was the other renderer I showed. They also have a pre-pop and extract. .NET's got the Filey SDK. The extract engines that I was all running, they're about to be open sourced, the ones that I've got. There is some level of that functionality in the other. So Happy has the engine. They've got a CQL extract for the definition approach. Those things are out there. And if you want more info, come grab me and we'll try and help you to get what's out there. So what did you learn? I'm hoping that you saw that pre-population extraction in SDC is awesome. I love it. Breathing it for a while. Some of the benefits and drawbacks of those approaches, some of the tools that are out there to help you, and in the hands-on lab that's coming up next, we'll go through the complex version. So just so that you see what is in that complex one, he says, hoping he gets the name right. So interestingly, we go questionnaires, DevDays demo, extract, so simple extract. So just pick complex, doesn't matter. So this is the form that we'll be going through in the hands-on lab. So it's got a name, multiple names, gender, contacts, and 3 observations. So it's got a good flavour of all the different bits. So we'll be doing that. And we'll sort of, by seeing that, you'll see why is picking one of those approaches better than the others. So there are significant differences. You can find me on chat.fire.org, brianposs.com. Brian Poss is where my Git code is, and I've got the extract Let's Build straight after, and Let's Build with Firepath on Friday, which has got some good stuff in there. And any questions? Wow. Surely Michael's got at least one question. There we go. Alex.
Thanks for the awesome talk. How do you prevent resources that, let's say, questionnaires that have been pre-populated by resources, and then you extract those resources again from, how do you prevent creating an endless loop of creating the same data all over again?
So the answer is that's up to you, is the really simple answer. If you're doing extracting out to new resources and then using the post, don't keep posting. that's pretty obvious. But with stuff like observations, you should be putting in the questionnaire response ID as it came from here, so that you can do some defensive work on your own handler of the bundle. So the bundle itself, there's no, you must post exactly this, or all of that. That's up to the receiver of that bundle or the processor of that bundle to decide how they want to handle it. In terms of a questionnaire design, if you're looking to pull a record out and then update it back in, then you're going to need to have all of the data in that resource coming from that. So you wouldn't want to do something like a patient update where you've only got the 4 fields for name, gender and date of birth or something, because it would wipe out anything else in the resource if you tried to update and put that back. So, yeah. Yep.
I did come up with a question. In your extract, perhaps you've collected a codable coding as part of your selection, but in the resource that you want to extract, you need to use a different code system. So maybe you need to put 2 codings in to align with a profile or something. Is there a way to do a translate or something?
Did I put him here and ask this question? The cool part, because it's using, the answer is each of the approaches is possibly going to have a slightly different answer. But if I look at both the definition approach and the template approach, they're using Firepath to grab the value to put in. So you can use the Firepath's terminology translation functions to actually do that. And so you can say, yep, here's the code coming in, translate to other code system, put it in. Pretty neat. Oh, there's another one down the back.
Thank you. This one's actually about pre-pop. I was thinking about how does, especially observation-based pre-pop, reduce the case where there are more than one match. So, for example, if you're querying for body weight and you have a patient who has come in the past 3 months repeatedly for getting their body weight measured, how does SDC reduce that to something that's rendered?
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer. I'll have to look that up and we'll check it out in the hands-on.
Well, actually, I just checked the spec and I think it says the most recent one, but I think there might be some issues with that in some situations potentially, because at least in FHIR path, you always have to think about if you get more than one match, because all FHIR paths intrinsically return arrays, I guess.
Yep.
Structure map the same, and you can explicitly say that you want to do max by or average or mean or whatever. But I think especially for the observation one, that might be a kind of severe pitfall in some cases, because the fact that the patient had their body weight taken like 10 times in the past 3 months, that's going to tell you something. And that's going to be obscured by doing this observation-based approach. So
so I think that's a good sample for where you would probably try the observation one in the first cut and then go, oh, okay, yeah, that's not cutting it. I need to know that other information. Then switch over to whether it was the template or the definition approach, and then do that FHIR path query to actually adjust, not the extract, the pre-pop. I'd switch over the FHIR path approach. Personally, that's what I would do. So I had control over exactly what that query was, and then whether I want to use last stand operation instead of a search, that would be a...
Yeah, and you can express pretty much all observations in FHIR paths anyway. So
Related
question, it would be really cool in this situation if the renderer could just give you a graph of all matching observations, so you can actually see the results changing over time.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Yep. That's not part of SDC at the moment.
Okay, unfortunately that's time, so if there are any
Thank you
more
very much,
questions, please reach out to Brian. Thank you.